Hi everyone, it's Ardith. Thanks for stopping by today. I love inlaid die cutting. I love the smooth look it gives. I love that you often get 2-for-1 cards from it. I'll link to a video above in the corner to show you how I've done inlaid die cutting in the past. But today I'm showing a fun technique where you can get the look of inlaid die cutting without having to keep track of all the little pieces and put them back into the outline. I've made a few cards with this technique now, and I thought it would be fun to make a video of this card and then show you the rest of the cards at the end of the video. So let's get started. The first thing you need is a suitable die. You need a die that has an outline like this Pinkfresh Studios Bold Blooms die. It has nice big pieces in the 2 flowers and some smaller pieces in the leaves. To start, I cut my outline from some black cardstock, and to make it easier to work with later, I put an adhesive sheet on the back, and I just pressed that down to make sure it was really stuck. Then I ran it through my Gemini Junior, and I made sure to use my metal shim since the outline is quite intricate and delicate. I also ran it through 2 times to make sure I got a clean cut. I find when I put an adhesive sheet on the back of my cardstock, that extra pass through the machine can really make a difference for getting a clean cut the first time. I use this Spellbinders tool-in-one that has a rolling brush on it, and that helps to push out all the little pieces from the die cut really easily. And then I'm just left with the outline in the die. And I found that as I pull the outline out, then if there's any little pieces left, they just fall out easily. Next, I used the same die, but a different sandwich, to emboss it onto a piece of white cardstock. Before I started, I spritzed the air and I ran my cardstock through it just to get the slightest bit of moisture on it so that it wouldn't crack when I embossed it. This time, my sandwich included this rubber embossing mat. Most die cutting machines come with one that will work with that machine. And you want the rubber between the cardstock and the cutting plate so that the edges of the die can't actually cut through the paper. It just presses into the paper and it leaves an embossed impression of your cardstock, a lot like an embossing folder. With my machine, I can't use my regular top plate because of the thickness of the sandwich, so I used an extra magnetic shim and a plastic shim that I had on hand. Your machine will have an embossing sandwich in its instructions, and you may need to play around a bit to find the sandwich that gives you the exact right pressure. And here's how it looks. You can skip the coloring if you want, but I colored all the pieces with Copic markers to create a stained glass look. You could also try other coloring mediums, but what you don't want is to press all that raised portion back down into the paper, so you want something where the pressure is quite light, which is why I chose my markers. I'm thinking that with colored pencils you might have to press too hard, but something like watercolors or Zig Clean Color markers would work, although then you might want to use watercolor cardstock for your embossed layer. What you want is to color each of the shapes right out to that outline, because you don't want any white little bits peeking out later. The other thing that I do quite a bit is to put the black outline back over and check to see how my coloring is coming along, and also if I've missed any little areas. It's easy to lie the outline over to check the coloring because of the embossed areas. It just kind of slides into place and then stays there. And those raised bits are the reason why this will look like inlaid die cutting. I chose fairly classic colors for this flower arrangement, reds and pinks for the roses, and greens and turquoise for the leaves. I chose black for my outline because I wanted to create a high contrast look of stained glass, but you could use any colors you want to create a completely different look. But because the black is so dark, I tried to keep my flower and leaf colors quite bright so that they'll really pop, and I didn't do too much shading on these. Now you could stop here and have it on a nice white background, and it would be beautiful, but I wanted even more of a stained glass look, so before my next step, I took a yellow marker and I went around the whole flower arrangement. This will help create a bit of a glow around it, and especially because there are little areas in the center that need to be colored because they won't be covered after my next step. On another piece of white cardstock, I blended some yellow inks, and this will create the rest of the front of my card, and it will give that glow as if it really is stained glass. I used the lighter yellow first, and I went in from the edges and eased off the pressure toward the center so that it would get lighter and look like it's glowing. I've re-inked my ink pads recently, and they're very juicy, so the ink is coming on quite dark, but it will fade slightly as it dries. Then I came back in with a deeper yellow just along the edges to deepen the color and make the center sections appear to be lighter. Finally, I spritzed an even layer of water on it to soften it and also give it a bit of texture. I set the panel aside to dry for a bit. Moving back to the colored panel, the next thing I did was to peel off the backer from that black outline and position it over top of my coloring. It takes a few seconds to make sure that the outline is in exactly the right place in all the areas, but just take your time, and when you're finished, press it down. Even though that coloring looked like a hot mess, look how nice it's looking now with that outline. I noticed that I missed a little spot in one of the leaves, so I just colored that carefully with the green marker. For the next step, I took the die and I cut it from the blended yellow panel. Then I laid the yellow panel over top of my colored panel. Now I managed to get it cut in pretty much the same place, but if you didn't get your positioning quite right and you've got little bits of the edges of the white panel sticking out, you can just cut them off and they won't show from the front. I used tiny dots of liquid glue to adhere the white panel to the yellow panel. And then one more step. I ran the glued together panels through my die cutting machine with no dies, just to apply pressure to them, and that kind of pushes everything together and really makes the panel look inlaid. To finish the card, I chose a little hello sentiment and I used my MISTI to stamp it in the bottom corner. And I backed the panel onto a piece of black cardstock. For both the stamp and the matte border, I tried to use a similar line weight to the outline of the die cut so that everything would feel balanced. Here's a few more examples that I've done with this technique. This one was done with a little wheel die that I embossed and used to make lemons, and I added some glitter glue to make the lemons look juicy. For this card, I used the iCrafter doily die. This one has tons of tiny pieces, and it would be really difficult to actually lay them back in. Can you imagine? So this is a really great technique if you want an inlaid look for a very intricate die. Finally, I used this decorative cross die from Pretty Pink Posh. This time I did try to add texture and shading to my coloring, especially to the cross itself. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is such a fun and easy way to get the look of inlaid die cuts. Product links are below and on my blog if you're interested. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.